I'd encourage you, if you've never taken the time to do a long fast, it's hard, but give it a shot. Because what you think would make you weak actually makes you strong in the areas that really matter. Our lives are ultimately a series of choices that we have to make, and the direction we choose at every fork in the road is going to determine who we are, who we become, and where we end up. And so it matters that we know how to make decisions well, especially because whether we're aware of it or not, whether we're even willing to admit it or not, there's often somebody waiting for us at the forks in the road. And it's not a good somebody. We occasionally say or hear the phrase, the devil's in the details. And I don't know whether that's 100% true, but I do believe the devil is sitting at every crossroads, waiting to tempt us into deciding that compromise is better and more fun than living out the courage of our convictions. And that idea isn't just like a notion that lives in my head. It's a biblical principle. The Bible tells us we have an enemy of our souls who is trying to steal, kill, and destroy our futures, who's lurking out there attempting continually to get us to settle for a smaller story than the one God wants to write in our lives. And in Matthew 4, what we read about is Jesus coming to a crossroads, and who should be waiting there for him but the devil, trying to get him to live in a different direction than the one he came for and make a deal. And that's the way the devil works in our lives. He's always trying to offer us some sort of deal and some sort of shortcut to get what we want a different way than the way God says we're supposed to do it. And so my hope in this series is that what we can learn isn't so much how to make a deal with the devil, but how to deal with the devil. And so if you have a Bible with you this morning, you can crack it open to the book of Matthew, chapter 4. If you don't have one, you can follow along the words on the screen. And if you need one, or your kids do, we have them back in the Next Steps area. They're free. We love it when they disappear. Take one before you leave today. Before we jump in, though, I realize that me standing up here and talking about the enemy of our souls called the devil sparks skepticism in some of you. Because we live in a world that just doesn't want to believe the devil is real and really kind of doesn't want to believe the metaphysical is real at all. We're too advanced for that in the 21st century. How can we believe something exists that we can't see, that actually affects our relationships and our finances and our marriages and our decisions? We're beyond believing in devils, right? If we can't see it, it's not real. We live in the 21st century. That makes sense. In the same way that it made sense in the 19th century for doctors not to believe in germs. Because how could something we can't see affect what we can see? And then this idiot doctor named Ignaz Semmelweis was like, all right, guys, but what if we wash our hands? Just like after we cut up a dead, sick body, what if we wash our hands before we walk into the maternity ward and deliver babies? What do you think? And everyone's like, you're so dumb. We'll do it anyway just to prove you wrong. And overnight, the mortality rate for mothers giving birth dropped by 90%. Who'd have thunk? But for real, in 21st century America, we tend to treat the supernatural the same way doctors in Europe treated germs in the 19th century. If I can't see it, I can't believe that it's just actually alive and real and floating around and making a difference in the world, right? But the Bible could not be more clear that there is an enemy of our souls who's a very real being named Satan and genuinely wants to steal, kill, and destroy our futures. And I think, even though we need a microscope to see germs, we don't even need a microscope to see the effects of that enemy. All we need is a rearview mirror. We just kind of got to look back at our own life story, at the decisions that we've made that we still regret, or how did I ever get to the point where I thought that was good? It so clearly was a bad choice. Hindsight is 20/20, but looking back, it's obvious that was an idiotic decision. How did my mind get that twisted? Or maybe you don't need a rearview mirror, you need a mirror because you're in it right now. Or maybe it's someone that you know. I think most of us have had these conversations. We see someone that we know and we love and we care about headed down the pathway to destruction. They're just making terrible choices, and we confront them about it, and then they explain their reasoning to us. And you have this long conversation where they're saying words that make sense in their own head. They're like, see how it's going? And all you can think the entire time they're explaining themselves to you is, at no point in your rambling, incoherent response did you come close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having heard that I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul. I've had these conversations. You have too. They're headed toward destruction because they've been deceived, and the consequences of that deception are significant. But the problem is, we've decided in the 21st century that the tangible is all there is. There is no longer any sort of spiritual reality, and so we don't have a coherent philosophical category for dealing with evil. And then we look out at the world as it is, full of senseless violence and hatred and division and more, and we can't wrap our minds around anything being out there that we can't control and manipulate and understand, and so we end up just struggling to deal with life. We are the most depressed, anxious, worried, medicated society that has ever existed in the history of the world. What do we do with that? Well, maybe we decide that the supernatural is real, because it is. And the devil is a very real enemy of our souls, and he really is waiting at the forks in the road to try to deceive us and direct us off course. But there's good news. Jesus showed us how to deal with that. So Matthew chapter 4, starting in verse 1, says this: Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The tempter came to him and said, If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread. And Jesus answered, It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. All right, there's a ton to unpack here, but first things first, wilderness. I think when we hear wilderness, we tend to think of escaping the hustle and bustle of it all. At least a lot of you think that. As an avid endorseman, I think, that's not a place I want to be. But some of you are like, why would I be tempted in the wilderness? That's the place where I'd be least tempted. Like, then I'm away from all the temptations. And while it's true that the wilderness is a space where we're kind of removed from the distractions and frustrations of life, what we need to understand is that for Jews in the first century, which is Matthew's audience, it meant something different. Because see, the story that God had been writing in for their nation and their people for a really long time included a long wilderness journey. They were slaves in Egypt for 4 centuries, and then God brought them out of slavery and took them to the wilderness, not to punish them, but to prepare them, not to isolate them, but to connect with them. And so for those people, what the wilderness represented was a decision point. It was an opportunity to choose what direction you were going to go and who you were going to trust with your life. Like in the wilderness, God continually showed up and provided for his people in unbelievable ways. But if you know anything about the story of Israel, you know it did not go very good, right? Even when God provided them food in a desert, like they cried out and they're like, hey, can you give us food? And then God provided food, and you know what they named it? Manna. Do you know what manna means in Hebrew? What is it? Ew. Like, God showed up and he gave them food, and they're like, it's not the food that we wanted. And so over and over and over again in this wilderness space, they came to a fork in the road, and they chose whining instead of winning. They chose rebellion instead of faith, and they went their own way. They took every shortcut they could possibly take, and they looked backwards towards slavery rather than forward toward the future. And finally, God looked at them, and he's like, fine, if you want to, wither in the desert rather than win, you can die wandering in the wilderness. It was your choice. And that's what they did, because that's what they chose. And so what I want us to see about the significance of Jesus being in the wilderness is that the wilderness is where you decide whether you're going to win the next battle or not. The wilderness is the place you decide whether you're going to win the next battle or not. See, I think we define ourselves by big moments and big battles. We look at our lives and we're like, yeah, it's like the epic experiences that make me who I am. But I don't think that's true. Bear with me for a minute. Weddings are big moments, right? But it's actually really easy to get married. I promise, if you lower your standards enough, I can get you hitched by tonight. Like, getting married is easy. Staying married is winning. And that's the result of a whole lot of little choices in the in-betweens. Giving birth is a big moment. But it's one thing to have a kid. It's another thing to raise a man or a woman of character who wants to come back and visit you once they're gone. That's an entirely different experience made up of a lot of small choices that you encounter at every fork in the road along the way. Right? And so it's not just the big moments that define us. It's the decisions that we make in the wilderness in between that actually lead to the big moments and prepare us for the big moments. Those are the choices that make us who we are and define our character and determine our destination, right? And so that's actually where we find Jesus. He's coming off a really huge moment in Matthew 4. Right before this, he had been baptized by John the Baptist. He was out there and he got dunked. And as soon as he came up out of the water, this voice from heaven thundered, "This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased." It was like this epic moment. And then right after that, he's in an in-between. And not on accident. Matthew tells us that the Holy Spirit led Jesus out into out into the wilderness specifically to be tempted by the devil, which is kind of scary, honestly. Like, I read that and I'm like, is that what God does? Is he just leading me into the devil's traps all the time? Is that why I have to pray, don't lead me into temptation? Because he will if I don't ask him not to. And before you panic, I want to say something. I do think there are seasons where God allows us to be tempted, and we'll get into why in a little bit, but I don't think that's what God's doing to us all the time. I think Jesus was led into the desert for this specific moment to show us how to deal with temptation when it occurs at the forks in the road. And ultimately, what Jesus shows us is how to overcome in that space instead of being overthrown in that space, like 1 Corinthians 5 tells us the nation of Israel was. All right? So Jesus is out there, and Satan shows up to tempt him. But first, before that even happened, he fasted for 40 days. Do you realize how long 40 days is? Like, you're not just hungry after 40 days without food. You are starving. You're at the point where you're thinking, like, I don't fight a lot. I don't even know if I have the strength to fight, but I would punch a man to steal his burrito right now. I would do it. Like, I feel like that sometimes after 40 minutes of not eating, let alone 40 days of not eating. But as we read this, I want us to be careful not to make a really simple mistake that I've heard teachers and preachers even make. We read the story and we're like, okay, the devil showed up to tempt Jesus right then because that's when he was at his weakest. Like, that's what a smart enemy would do, hit you when you're weak. And I do think that the devil is prone to tempt us when we're weak and where we're weak. And I do think that the devil showed up to tempt Jesus because he thought Jesus was weak in this moment. But it was a grave miscalculation by an overmatched enemy. See, the devil always assumes we're weak when something has been withheld from us. That's his MO. And so Jesus had been withheld, or food had been withheld for Jesus for 40 days. So the devil's like, he's got to be weak. And when we're missing something, when we feel like I don't have what I need, the devil always shows up. It's what he's been doing since the very beginning and twists it and tells us you're weak because something's been withheld. So he did in the Garden of Eden, right? God gave Adam and Eve this entire garden. He's like, eat anything except for that one tree. Then the devil showed up and twisted, and he's like, God's holding out on you. Did he really say you can't eat from any of these trees? He's not good. He doesn't love you. You're missing out on the thing that's being withheld. And that's the same exact temptation he gave Jesus. He's like, I have no idea why the Father would withhold food from you for this long. But he's not good. Feed yourself. You can. Because the assumption is always going to be that we're at our weakest when something has been withheld. But Jesus showed us something here, which is that you can starve your body and still feed your soul. See, the Spirit didn't lead Jesus to fast in order to weaken him. Instead, it was to train him for the coming temptation, to prepare him for what was happening by reminding him of the deeper need that existed inside of him. Because that deeper need, that deeper hunger is real for all of us. The longest I've ever fasted is 10 days. And at the end of that, I ordered the large combination platter from Gonzo's Tacos in Davenport, and I was just one of the worst decisions I've ever made. I suffered for days because of your body just cannot handle the large combination platter from Gonzo's after 10 days of not eating. But I can tell you this, I fast for a week a couple times a year. Day 2 and day 3, you're hangry. You're furious. You don't sleep well. All you're doing is dreaming about food. It's the only thing that you dream about, and you're just craving it, and you're dying for it, and then it fades. Just a little bit. There's a constant starvation that exists just under the surface of your life, but after a while, you realize, man, I am missing something more than food. There's an emptiness in me that is bigger than my stomach, because you look out at the problems of the world, you're like, it has to be bigger than this. There has to be more meaning to life than my next meal, and you become desperate for the thing that can truly satisfy. And that's what was happening to Jesus here. He became desperate for the thing that could truly satisfy. And I'd encourage you, if you've never taken the time to do a long fast, it's hard, but give it a shot. Because what you think would make you weak actually makes you strong in the areas that really matter.